much, Ananda. Can you just pass me that clock so I can just keep an eye on the time? Thanks very much. So yeah, it's a really great pleasure to be able to introduce Maitreyabandhu and have him here at North London Buddhist Centre. So like Anandabhadra says, Maitreyabandhu's kind of put his life into the movement, into practicing Buddhism. He first got involved in the mid-80s, I think, kind of 1985, and quickly kind of threw himself in, got ordained, and since then it's been a really kind of key part of the London Buddhist Centre and making that the massive success that it is today. He's been living in a men's community there for many years, and that has involved all sorts of things, particularly kind of a lot of kind of big kind of creative projects. He put on an opera once, a Buddhist opera involving the Sangha. He's written several books, like Anandabhadra mentioned, integral kind of courses that we lead, like Life with Full Attention and Journey in the Guide, and also a book on friendship. He's also published a lot of poetry books with Blood Axe, and poetry has been a big part of his life. He's won lots of awards and is constantly getting published in different poetry journals. He's put on the very successful arts project at the LBC Poetry East, where he's interviewed lots of kind of really prominent figures in poetry and in the arts and literature. He's also ordained many people as well. He's ordained me, and how many people have you ordained? Countless numbers of people.
15, I think.
15, okay. Recently he put on the Nature of Mind project, which was a project kind of looking at the nature of mind with Buddhism, but also interviewing people outside of the Buddhist tradition, neuroscientists, people like Ian McGilchrist, philosophers and so on. And that's a really great project. Do go and look at that on YouTube. There's lots of great material to find out in the Nature of Mind project. Probably more than anything though, I think Maitreyabandhu is significant to me just for being a good friend. He's a good friend to me, he's a good friend to many people, and he's good at being a friend. And despite all the massive projects he's been involved in, he's always got time to meet people. He's always had time to meet me over the years and go for lunch, and he's always good value to have a cup of coffee with. Always great fun, always makes me laugh. But we can talk about meaningful things with him as well. So great. I've never interviewed someone like this before, but I doubt Maitreyabandhu will need much prompting. He doesn't normally. So, but maybe I'll just start with friendship. I mean, the Buddha said that friendship is the whole of the spiritual life, but it's something that Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of our order, has really kind of emphasised as an important distinctive emphasis of our of Triratna, our movement. Can you say a bit about that and why that is? You think that is important today, and what your experience of it has been?
Oh, really? It's difficult to talk about friendship. I wrote a book about friendship, and it's one of those things, like so many things of value, that you shouldn't sort of be too conscious about in a certain sort of way. It's weird that people nowadays say Maitreyabandhu has given his life to this. Think, oh God, no, I'm not dead yet. Sounds terribly fine. But if I have given my life to anything, it's mostly been friendship. And I definitely got that from Bhante's drawing out of friendship as being the crucial relationship. So you could, perhaps you could just say that in Buddhism, classic Buddhism, the crucial relationship is friendship, really, which is very, very different from any other tradition, I think. That is the relationship to concentrate on. It's very, very countercultural now, because for most of us, friendship is what we have between relationships or at the edges of relationships and so on. Buddhism puts the world the other way around and wants to put friendship at the centre of things and relationship somewhere around the edge, which hasn't always gone down very well. But Bhante's, Bhante he's drawn that, he understands Buddhism, to use that word Buddhism, which I don't think is a very good one, but anyway, he understands Buddhism precociously deeply, not just in its what it teaches, but how it feels to be a Buddhist. And he knew, even though he's not had that many friendships in his life in a certain sort of way, he knew that friendship was how Buddhism feels. So I think that's all I'd say about friendship, is that being with friends, living with friends, Aristotle said friendship is living together, is how Buddhism feels. If you were to create a Buddhist culture, it would be a culture that is primarily a network of friendships. It was interesting, just last night I had a friend of mine come for a meal at the community. I cooked, which is a shame because I'm not a very good cook, and so he got a bit of the short straw. But it was Friday night, and we were going to see a film, but not until a bit later. So we all had, and I wasn't teaching or anything, so we all had time to sort of sit around and chat. And we talked about films, and we talked a bit about the Dharma, and then we talked about the book I'm writing at the moment, and it was just friends being together for no good reason. It wasn't us we weren't sort of self-consciously being friends, we weren't trying to have an improving experience. Nothing extrinsic in that way. We were just like friends. We just sat there and we watched, someone said, have you seen this film? Let's have a look at the ads, so somebody shows you and then I tease somebody gets teased, But nothing special at all about it. And yet, in a certain sense, a very kind of uselessness of that, the humanity of that we can move from having a joke to having a tease to being very, very serious to being not very serious to having nothing much to do. That's very, very like the spirit. That would be like the spirit that you'd come into if you met the Dharma properly. Is that here's somewhere where you can be yourself, where you can say things, where you can have a laugh, where you can be really serious, where you can switch between things, where just being together is enough. So I think probably the main thing I'd say from this distance, as it were, is because you don't want to be too explicit about friendship, otherwise you weirdly turn it into utility, and as soon as you turn things into utility, there you kill them. There's no good reason to be friends. You're just friends. Just like when you were a boy, nobody said, why don't you, isn't it good to have friends? You just they were friends, and that's what life was. Life equals friendship, and friendship equals life, Nothing much more to say about it, really. So also writing the whole book about it, I'd rather wish I'd just said that. I made a big deal about it.
So you mentioned a bit about Bhante then, Sangharakshita. Could you say a bit about your memories of Bhante and your meetings with him, and what his significance is for you, and what you think maybe his significance is?
His significance is much more difficult, but his significance for me, the first time I think I saw Bhante, he was giving a talk at Red Lion Square. You were probably there, I can't remember. Do you remember? I think it was the Buddha's Victory, I think. That one with a picture of all the terrible pictures. And I didn't like him very much. I remember thinking he's like a sort of rather grave junior school headmaster. He had a tweed jacket on and a tie, and walked very slowly and talked in that very, very slow voice, where he enunciates very carefully. And I remember thinking, what is the big deal? I wasn't massively struck by him. But in those days, everybody talked about Bhante. You said, you remember when people used to say, oh, Bhante's here, I don't know, Bhante said this. Unfortunately, nowadays, you can go to Sri Rana centres and not hear that word, which is actually disgraceful. But anyway, in those days, that's all we talk about. And I remember the idea was to go and see him. He used to stay in a flat just next to Sangharakshita where I lived. In a previous life, it feels like now, as you say, in the 1980s. And I asked to go and see him, and the meeting was a disaster, a parallel disaster. And I met I won't go through all the agonies of it, but all I remember was coming out of the meeting thinking, well, I hate him. And I thought he hated me as well. And I thought, I always crawled out, it was terrible. Much later I talked to him about it, and he said, it won't surprise you, I don't remember that meeting. So I was just very in awe of him, really. I think we all were, weren't we? And I couldn't speak to him, really. I remember trying to have a conversation with him about Blake, about whom I knew nothing whatsoever. And as soon as I started to have a conversation, you could see immediately I didn't know what I was talking about, so I just looked out the window. And I remember thinking, I hate you. Not very nice. And then just before I got ordained, it was the first year we wore robes, and I received, and then we had these pigeonholes, and I had this beautiful little note from Bhante saying, if you would like to, Bhante, he was often addressed himself in the third person, if you would like to, and if you need help with your robes, Bhante is happy to show you. So, I've been trying on these robes, and the old-fashioned robes, not the robes we wear now, and I rushed down to get Bhante to show me how to put them on. And I just forgot to be nervous, that's all it was. I was a bit excited about going off to be a 4-month retreat. I was 29. It was just terribly exciting. So I just forgot to be nervous with Bhante. And also because Bhante was showing me something. And then he showed me how to put them on. And I said, oh God, that's so good. I've been trying, I didn't know what to do. He just said, I think they've worked it out in the last 2,500 years. And I just burst out laughing. And it's like that laughter just sort of broke my feeling in awe of him. And then after that I managed to more and more, I'd always find excuses to go and see him and talk to him about things. And and then I remember one day going to see him and thought, I don't need an excuse, I can just say I'd like to see you. I remember that was quite a turning point. Normally I'd have to think of something I needed to talk to him about, or something responsible that wasn't just me. And so I remember one time thinking, I don't need to do that, just be me. So I went to see him. And I've seen him quite often all that time. But Bhante, for us, you couldn't overestimate his importance. Very easily, I don't know how you could anyway. The best way of thinking, how I think about Bhante anyway, and it's not how everyone thinks about Bhante by any means, and of course I'm aware of all the scandals, but how I think of him is as a spiritual genius, really, by which, and geniuses aren't always very easy to be around. I don't, for instance, think of him as being a good Buddhist. I don't think I think he's beyond that. I think it's good to be a good Buddhist, but you're trying to get beyond being a good Buddhist. I think of him as a sort of spiritual genius. Now, one of the definitions of genius is that what a major artist does, for instance, is they take up a form, like the sonnet form in poetry, or the symphony in music, or the multiple figure composition in painting, set forms like that, and they excel at that form, like Titian does with multiple figure compositions. I don't know, whoever does, Robert Frost does with a sonnet. But one definition of genius is that genius creates a new form. Doesn't just excel at the form they've got, but they create a new form, which then people work in, if you see what I mean. So in music you've got, Wagner created music theatre, which is effectively a new form. It's not really opera, it's another thing altogether. Etc. Etc. Can't think of many new forms, but and I think that's the best way of thinking what Bhante has done. He's created a new form, but it's the form that Bhante has created is it's not Bhante, as it were. It's not that he's come up with this new jazzy modern Buddhism thing. He's found he's translated the essential spirit of Buddhism into a new form. For us, which we can then practice within. That is a remarkable achievement. It's so remarkable, and the problem with new forms, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to understand the nature of new forms is because you then live within them and you don't notice it's a new form. Like listening to Wagner now, it's quite difficult to realise just how revolutionary, as Sam knows, Wagner was. That there really is music before Tristan and Isolde, and there's music after. Changed how people understood music and so on. But before you just they feel like they've always been then great forms. Bante's translation of the Buddha Dharma into this new form feels like it's always been there. I remember a friend of mine saying, "Look, I want to practice Buddhism, not Banteism." And I said, "What did you have in mind?" And they said, "Well, the 10 positive precepts." And I said, "Well, that isn't in Buddhism. You won't find that in the Pali. You will find it in the Pali Canon, but you need to look very hard for it, and you won't find it in that form. It's actually part of Bante's new form. And what form does is it allows certain things and doesn't allow certain things. And form, like I know poetry best, so like the sonnet form, 14 lines with a volta after the 8th line. If you try to write in a sonnet form, it kind of, especially if you then try to write, in a rhyme form as well, it rejects all sorts. You can't do stuff. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't go over 14 lines. You can't. If you're doing a classic sonnet, you can't. It has to be in pentameter. It has to rhyme in this way. So there's lots of things that already you can't do. What's exciting for me about form in poetry is that that very fact that you can't do it, that resistance that it creates, means you can't say what you just fancy saying. You have to make it rhyme, and it has to be 14 lines, it has to be a volta after the 8th line. And if you've got the right form, it makes you actually say something deeper, more resonant and more valuable than you could have done without that form. It's amazing. The form itself rejects things and accepts other things and sort of puts a discipline on you. No, you can't say that, it doesn't rhyme, or you can't say that because it doesn't scan, the reason why poets have used forms like that is because you have to really work at that. And Auden, a great poet, he said that whilst you're working at that technique, all the unconscious motivations are all being allowed to come into the form because you're not very conscious of them. So you see, that's what form does. It creates a kind of restraint. It's like a discipline. And Bante's created a form in that sense, a sort of restraint, a discipline. And the Buddha said, there's no such word as Buddhism in Buddhism. He called it my Dharma and my discipline, which is, a discipline is like a form. So here's what that form allows you to do, and here's what that form resists you doing. So I'm about to go off on a 2.5 months ordination retreat. That's part of our form. Wearing robes for that retreat is part of our form. Wearing kesa is part of the form. A friend of mine I've just been talking to, he's going on a month solitary. That's part of our form. Single sex, for instance, is part of our form, part of our restraint. And lots of people don't like single sex. For all sorts of reasons, some of them valid, some of them not so valid. But it's part of our form, it's part of the discipline that you meet. Being a vegetarian is part of our form. If you were a Tibetan Buddhist, you wouldn't necessarily be a vegetarian. So form creates a certain sort of discipline, and discipline creates a certain sort of strength. You can't just do what you fancy. Even as soon as you take up a meditation, you take up a form. I was just watching somebody teach the mindfulness of breathing, and we had a little sharing moment, and this guy was saying, I was just letting myself be, and which I never know what people mean by that. And it's nothing to do with mindfulness of breathing. The form says, no, here's what you're trying to do, focus on the breath. How you do that is a massive matter. But no, it's not just about sort of sitting there, and you see how if you take the form seriously, it creates a certain sort of muscle, and you have to do that well. You have to do it intelligently, and etc. And that might include letting things be in a certain sort of way, but that's to enable the form. So that's my sense of Bhante, that he's created a new form for Buddhism, which it's difficult to see a better one, and it's absolutely true to the spirit of the Dharma. I have doubt whatsoever. But yeah, it's a form, and some bits of it you'll like, and some of it will resist you, you know. And that's a valuable thing, you know. You know, like I would never have gone on a solitary retreat. I'm not that sort of guy. But the form wants me to do that. Do you see what I mean? And because I've done that against quite a bit of resistance, I've grown from that resistance, from that form. So that's how I think about him now. That he's a genius in that traditional sense that you've created a new form in which people then can experience a whole range of things and create a sort of discipline. Yeah. And you know, if you want to be ordained, you are taking his ordination. There's no such thing as a broad-based Buddhist ordination. So they don't exist. There are ordinations that are to do with different traditions. So if you are ordained in Sri Lanka, you take Bhante's ordination. You mustn't think that it's some sort of loosely Buddhist-y stuff. It's not. It's Bhante's ordination.
But obviously, Bhante died a few years ago, so it's not possible to meet him personally now. But what for people in this community, you know, getting involved and want to find out about the form as you talk about, and essentially not meet him in person, but meet him through his work. What do you think is the best way to go about that?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like my mother died at the end of last year, and I'm still struggling with the tense. When people say, I don't want to use was, my mother was, but I can't quite use my mother is. It feels like there should be another tense for the dead, which is neither was nor is. And I still feel that about Bhante. I'm tempted to say Bhante is like this, and then I say Bhante was like that. Neither quite capture it. I think Bhante is as available to you as he ever was to me. In fact, it's a bit easier for you to have a relationship with Bhante because you don't have the actual historical person, you know, in your own relationship to them to manage, you know. Going on about poetry, but I've been reading a long poem by an American poet called James Merrill, and he wrote, the whole poem is about his experiments with the Ouija board, which I have no experience of and no interest in. But anyway, he manages to contact just about anyone he fancies, you know, contacts Auden, and then eventually he talks to Plato and the Archangel Michael, nuts. But one of the things he says about that is that, like, he did know Auden slightly, but he felt quite in awe of Auden, and a bit, you know, and Auden was, you know, quite old by then and a bit grumpy and, you know, not in his best. He said, when he met him through the Ouija board, Auden was always quintessentially Auden, you know, talkative, camp, hugely informed, you know, interesting, just like the quintessence of Auden. So I think there's something in that you can now have a relationship with Bhante without some of the irritations of his actual historical person. You know, sometimes I didn't always like Bhante necessarily, but one doesn't always like anybody, including oneself. And you shouldn't have to always like. You can't always like anyone, really, can you? Because, you know, sometimes with Bhante you just want to say, no, Bhante, that's just what you say. I know what you say. There's always something a bit, partly because he is a genius, and partly just because he's a very unusual man, by anyone's, you know, judgment. So it's in a way easier just to have direct relationship with the spirit that is Bhante now, without the historical bits, you know, which weren't always very comfortable. You know, Bhante would be in very different moods. Like, I remember him coming for a meal at the Carmody, and then again, it was very early on, and he just turned to me and said, "Where have you come from?" And I completely panicked and just said, "What do you mean? Where do I come from? Like, where do I come from? Where do I come from spiritually?" So, you know, I made a complete dog's dinner of it. He just said, "Where have you come from just now?" "Upstairs!" And that's all I said to him the whole evening. And then he just, you know, completely relaxed, and he then eats his meal. Didn't say a word. We were all sitting there. He didn't say anything. And I said, "I think it's time to go." You know, that was it. And I remember saying to him, you know, much later when I could talk more easily to him, I said, "That was a terrible evening, brother, you know, like, we were so in awe of you, we didn't talk to you very much, and you didn't say anything, you just went off. And he said, oh, actually, I was probably writing just then, and when I was writing, I just found it really difficult to talk to people. I just didn't want to talk to people. So, if you're around a meal table with Bhante who doesn't want to talk, it's not a nice feeling, I tell you. He's just going to go on. And he's like really relaxed. And, the silence gets tenser and tenser. So it's good not to have all that. So, you read his poem. Particularly, I would read the memoirs, and I would particularly read the seminars if you want to get close to Bhante. But also, if you're close to any order member who is clearly a disciple of Bhante, and there really shouldn't be any others, but if you are close to an order member that's clearly a disciple of Bhante, you'll be in relationship with Bhante. There's no doubt about it. A lot of Bhante comes through my friends, really. I used to have dreams about Bhante that seemed to have so much about him. But he's just as available to you as he was to me, except for you won't have the embarrassing first meeting, which is probably a good thing.
And another distinctive emphasis that Bhante has made for the movement, which you've mentioned quite a bit already, is the arts. Could you say a bit about, you went to Goldsmiths College before you were involved in Buddhism, for the likes of Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas. You were already kind of very much into the arts and Wagner and so on. But when you came across Buddhism, you found that, I think you were quite delighted to find that there was a real place for the arts at the imaginal faculty. Could you say a bit about that and what Bhante says the significance of the arts are to spiritual life?
Yeah, well, I read his book, Religion of Art, really early on, very, very, very early on. I must have, in the first few weeks. And if you reread it, now it's quite old-fashionedly written, isn't it? I think the first sentence has got 7 clauses, which nobody writes that anymore. But it is a piece of genius, and I remember being very, very deeply struck by the religion of art. I made it a bit of a kind of key text for me for a long time. I studied it, I taught it eventually. It's interesting because I was at art school with Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas and all that lot. And but Bhante wouldn't have thought that had anything to do with art. I don't think so. I remember, for instance, at Seamus Heaney, he said, too many potatoes for my liking. I don't know what you mean. I don't think it's entirely just, but I know what you mean. I think Bhante, what can I say about the first thing I always want to emphasise is it's not an essential. You don't need to be involved in the arts to be a very, very committed Buddhist and a very effective, committed order member. You don't need to have any interest in sort of high arts at all. One of Bhante's teachers, Dharma Rinpoche, probably would have had no contact throughout his whole life with anything that we would call high culture, and Bhante thought of him as a living bodhisattva. He would have come from a very, very deeply Tibetan culture, and therefore would have that, but not very much that we would call sort of so-called high art. So we mustn't get into this thing that somehow that's essential to what you're doing. I remember I once launched a book of Bhante, and Bhante said to me, look, I know that many of the essays here are about the arts, but don't over-emphasise that. Because he knew that I was into the arts, so he said, don't over-egg that, make sure you talk about all the other things I'm writing about. Because for some people, the arts still got that, even that word, the arts, you suddenly want to sound a little bit more middle class. You suddenly want to wear a cravat, don't you? And, saying Schopenhauer, like that. Which is a shame, because it's only, that's a sort of English thing. If you're in England, the arts has always been associated with class. If you go to Italy, and you'd be going to the opera. If you went to Russia, you'd be going to the opera. And you wouldn't think of it as being sort of totally middle class thing. But it has got very mixed up with class. It's got, for some people, it makes them feel, it makes them feel diminished. I I don't come from I come from a very ordinary background. My parents ran a coach company. My father, I have 3 older brothers, all of whom are sort of engineers and mechanics, and coach drivers, things like that. So I don't come from an arty or cultural background at all. But for some, for all kinds of reasons, I kind of got into that. Perhaps it's best to tell one little story. I mean, because it's nothing to do with the arts, really. I remember a friend of mine said, I said to him, let's go and see to this exhibition of paintings. He said, I'm not sure I'm into paintings. And I thought, how stupid is that? It's like the stupidest thing you've ever heard, isn't it? It's like someone saying, I'm not really into clouds or something, or trees. You just think, what's that got to do with anything? This whole idea of the art itself is really just wrong. Like, what you're saying, you're not into beauty, you're not into meaning, you're not into enjoyment, you're not into exploration. You can't be saying you're not into that. You might be saying, I haven't looked at many paintings and I don't quite know how to do it. Okay, well, we can talk about that. But to say I'm not into the arts is like saying I'm not into the countryside, or I'm not into cafes, or I'm not into walking down the street. You think, okay, So I think the whole discussion of it in the terms of the arts is sort of wrong. My little story to try and give you a picture of that is I went to see Wagner's. I'm a bit of a Wagner fan. I went to see, don't know where I am, I don't believe in his politics, but I went to see the Meistersingers, which is weirdly an opera I don't know very well. It's one of Wagner's great operas, and it's an opera I don't know very well. In fact, I've never listened to it, which is odd, because I know the others, many of the others released very well. And I went with Jan Archer, a good friend of mine. I always go with friends. And neither of us had listened to it, and neither of us knew anything about it. When it first started, I was like, this is rubbish. It's just rubbish. For starters, it's a comedy. If you know anything about Wagner, somebody should say, do you think that's really going to be your form? Because, it's not a good choice for Wagner. And I thought the first act was just daft and silly. And I remember thinking, because it's supposed to be one of his great works, I remember thinking, well, I just don't get it at all, I'm just not. And then the second act's a bit better, but still not very good, I don't think. I've changed my opinion about that now. But. And then the third act, Jan Archer and I were having these little chats together saying, it's just rubbish, it's rubbish. We were both like in the same kind of, what? What's the big deal? Anyway, you go into the third act, and the music of the third act, it's like you've got into this lift and you've gone down into the basement, and you've suddenly got this incredible. Immediately it starts, the third act, you're sort of, oh my God, what is it? And it's about this, the Meister song. You have to come up with this song for a competition in the opera. And it's a beautiful, the most exquisite song, and he writes the song and the tenor sings it. And this production had it so that they were writing a song, and he'd sing a verse, I can't do it, in wonderful tenor. This fantastic song that you just die for. And then the guy is writing down it, and then in the production I saw they put it on a little white piece of paper, and he pinned it to a line to dry the ink. And then as the music got more, there's this incredible quintet, and as the music got more and more transcendental, the line tightened and this piece of paper went up. And it was spotlit. So eventually you had the 5 singers doing this incredible quintet, sort of semi-lit. Then you had this square of paper brightly lit above them, the art object. And it was, my experience of it was of being catapulted, as I very rarely am, but have been on a few occasions, catapulted into a completely other world, where I literally burst into tears. And when I think about those tears, it was like unbearably moving. My whole body, heart, guts, mind, thoughts were all running with the music. And because it's music about music, it's a paean about the nature of art itself. and a very, very intelligent one actually, I think, and easily misread to be sort of patriotic, but nationalistic. It is patriotic, but it's not nationalistic, I think, or doesn't need to be. But what you experience at the best in the arts, you experience that you touch value itself. It's not that you think about it, valuably discuss it. You actually are married to value in that moment, and you're married to value at every level of your being. Physically, emotionally, instinctively, intellectually, and in that moment, the reason I was weeping was because somewhere in that experience is, why have I ever let myself go anywhere else from that? Why have I got myself why have I got so lost from that? Why do I think rubbish, talk rubbish, go through stupid things in my mind, flick through Alsatian videos on my phone? Why, when there's my life, the whole of my life needs to be about being married to value in this deep kind of mythic marriage of value. When you experience it, you experience its supreme value, and you also experience how alienated you are from it most of the time, and how futile and silly, and you didn't mean. It's like you're a child that's got lost and you didn't mean to get lost, and suddenly you're at home again, and you just weep for being at home, and that you'd always wanted to be at home, and that home is this place of the marriage of values, and this is a marriage across time with somebody I probably wouldn't like, not a very likeable man, saying something that couldn't be closer to me, in ways that couldn't be more beautiful. That's why people take it so seriously, that you can have that experience, and that experience, is very like the growing experience that you're trying to have all of the time through Buddhist practice. And Bhante understood that because he'd come at that experience from Buddhist practice and meditation, and the incredibly deep study into the Buddhist canon, and from a quite extraordinary, prodigious kind of psyche. Like he read Paradise Lost when he was 13, and said it put him into an absolute ecstasy. Now, how a 13-year-old can read Paradise... I read Paradise Lost and it's fantastic, but I couldn't imagine reading it when I was 13. He listened to Beethoven 7th, I think, when he was about that age, and he said it sort of threw him out of his body, and it took days to sort of return to his body, and he had the music playing all the time. He was like in this other world. He's so weirdly sensitive to beauty like that. So he's come up that experience from both ends, but it's nothing to do with the arts. It's nothing to do with Wagner and the Wagner Society and what Wagner's anti-Semitism was and so on, which was horrid. The arts don't capture it, and Bhante understands that, I think. And we still don't really... I wish we could find a way around that. There's so much value in what we call the arts, but if you knock on the door of the arts, usually that value is closed. Actually, the great way to get to those values is through the Dharma, I think, now.
So my next question, kind of, I think a lot of people are quite intimidated by, the arts and things like that. And I am sometimes. Like you wrote a series of poems on Cézanne. And I wish I could look at a Cézanne and get what you get from it. I think a lot of people are like that. High culture is a bit alienating. Have you got any tips for how you kind of can get beyond that and get into that? Or
I think
is it a case of some people it's not for them, it doesn't have to be?
No, it doesn't have to be, and I think that's part of it, is one of the reasons why people don't enjoy the arts is they feel pressured to. You can see it when you go to a gallery, everybody's trying to get something out of it and nobody knows what to do. So people treat art like they treat the Eiffel Tower. I went to the Cézanne exhibition about 8 or 9 times. And this woman said to me, "You have been standing in front of this painting for an hour," which is not actually true. And I said, "Yes." She said, "Nobody can take a photograph." And I said, "Well, it takes an hour to enjoy it." She said, "Oh yeah, sure." You're like, oh my God, who's ever going to believe that? It's like Suzanne painted them to look at, to photograph them. So one of the reasons why people photograph them, they do want value from them, they just don't know what to do. So one of the things that you don't do is try not to feel that you have to. Don't go and look at things, or like I just said to Rand Proller, there's an exhibition just down the road of Morandi's paintings by Morandi at the Esterick Gallery, which is just 5 minutes down the road. Esterick is Morandi is one of the great kind of inheritors of Cézanne. Just go down there, and all you do, it's just like looking at a tree or watching your breath. You just do it. You don't like when you watch your breath. You don't go, am I into my breath? What am I that kind of person? You just watch your breath, and most of the time you're a bit bored and a bit distracted, and it's just the same. You just go and look at a painting, and most of the time you're a bit bored, and then you look at the attractive people in the gallery. In most of the time, when people go to the gallery, most of the thing you notice is the attractive people in the gallery. Sort of glance across at a painting. That's just how it is. Most of art, having an involvement in the arts is it's a bit boring, it's a bit pointless, it's a bit nothing. Just as meditation is, or study can be, or anything valuable can be. And all you're trying to do is give it your best. Be open to that there might be something here, and if there is something there, it is for you. It's not for someone better educated than you. I used to always think that I wanted to be into the arts, but I thought they were probably for someone who'd, studied Latin at school or something. I remember a friend of mine when I was at art school said he was reading Proust in the original French. And I just thought, that's what I thought art was for, reading Proust in the original French. I haven't read in the English. So you have to assume it's just for you. Any great artist couldn't want, you're the very person they're trying to talk to. You and no one else, effectively. But you might need to get over that sense of I can't do this, I don't know what I'm doing. And mostly what people don't do is they don't give it enough time. And that's true of meditation, it's true of friendship, it's true of ritual, it's true of having rapturous experience of the natural world. Most of us don't give stuff enough time. So guess what? It doesn't do anything. If you go and look at Cézanne and just photograph it, no, it won't do anything, no. Of course it won't. But that would be true of a friend. If you just said, hi friend, how you doing? Fine, okay, bye. You're not going to get anything out of a friend from that, What people tend to do is they try and look at, go to a gallery and look at 2 or 3 paintings max, but look at them for a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes until somebody comes to tell you off. I remember once being at another show with a friend of mine, a Bonnard show, and one of the gallery attendants said, could you please move along? She'd been standing in front of that painting for an hour. And then she suddenly went, what are you actually doing? And I said, I was looking, and then she said, what do you mean? I told her wife, and back then she was like, wow, that's so good. Most people just don't know how to look, because you just stand there and get bored and just keep looking. Gradually the painting starts to turn towards you. And it's just like the breath does. If you watch the breath long enough, gradually it starts to be really valuable. It's nothing to do with the arts. It doesn't matter. You don't need to know anything about Cézanne, you don't know anything about Miranda, you don't need to know anything about Wagner. All you need to be is open to the moment of attention, give it attention, and be a bit willing to think it might do something for you. That's all. But a lot of people, they're just an ignorant. I can't remember with you, when we were on the community retreat, we went to Barbara Hepworth's gallery and her garden, and I went with these friends of mine who were much more educated than me. I'm not very educated. They'd all been to uni, they could all do exciting things, but they would not look at a Barbara Hepworth. The great thing about the Hepworth garden in St Ives is you can feel the sculptures, which you normally can't. And they're very erotic. As soon as you feel them, I thought I understood them, because they're very, very erotic. And these friends of mine, they just wouldn't try. I was really struck by it, that educated, not wealthy, but come from solid middle class background, they wouldn't even try. I just thought they were just being an ignoramus, So of course if you won't try, if you won't be open to something, of course you're not going to get anything from it. You could go you could walk down Yosemite, and if you're like, well, you won't find it at all beautiful, So you've got to do your bit, and then you just wait mostly, and not expect much, and because most art experiences aren't that rapturous at all. They're just slight experiences. People, even the word beauty is a bit in italics, isn't it? It's not usually quite like that. Which is not to say it's not there, it's just not there in that italic script. And look at your class, if it's to do with class or race or whatever, look at those issues so that they don't get in the way of the work, Shakespeare, whoever you name. I've been reading Derek Walcott again recently, who's like a major modern poet. He wants to talk to everybody, and as many people as possible. And it's not hard, it's not that hard.
Okay, and so here we are. This is the first kind of men's event we've had in a while at this centre. And you live in a men's community, and as you were saying earlier, it's part of our tradition to have single sex is quite a strong emphasis to single sex activities. Could you say a bit about the value of that? And it does seem to go against the grain a bit these days. Maybe it always has in a way.
It probably always has, but it's more and more countercultural, almost by the day now. I mean, particularly men, actually interesting, when we talk single sex, what goes against the grain is men-only environments, not so much women-only environments, but men-only environments. People are very, very deeply suspicious of men-only environments. And in some ways, for good reason, There has been an old boys club. Men have misused their privileges, without doubt. It's been men have got clubbed together to keep women out of major roles and lots of. There's reasons for criticising men's open spaces. They easily get clubby and inward-looking and self-vaunting and so on. So I can understand the criticism, but they're not. That doesn't mean to say they inevitably will be like that. It's funny, really, with single sex. I mean, again, there's an increasing amount of people feeling that they don't fit into gender, and so they find single sex things very difficult because it can feel that they're not welcome, which I feel sensitive to. There's no. I no longer really, and I'm writing a book at the moment, I no longer want to argue for it. Mainly because I've never found an argument that I'm particularly convinced by. I think, just talking about men's activities, I think you have to experience them. I don't think they are an ideology, really. I think you need to experience them and see for yourself. But again, like looking at Cézanne or looking at Yosemite, you have to be a bit open to that it could be a value. If you go into single-sex environments and think that this is bad, well, that's what you'll see. So I tend not to want to argue for them. They're very traditional. Bante's sort of thinking about single-sex is very, very traditionally Buddhist. In fact, we're quite soft in that way. It's exquisitely traditional, but it's just translated. The assumption would have been that you're in a monastery with only other men, or a nunnery with only other women, and that was seen to have been the best conditions for centuries. Single sex is just a sort of modern rewriting of that in new conditions, a brilliant re-understanding of it. So it's very. There's nothing. It's very, very traditionally Buddhist. In fact, all religions have single-sex values. I can't think of one that doesn't. And no, that isn't always for power reasons. It can be, I know, but it's not always. So mainly, I've lived in a men's community. I've spent a lot of my time in men-only environments. I suppose the other thing I should say is that I'm gay, and sometimes people think that that's, oh well, you would. And that's not quite. When I first got involved, all of my friends were women. I found it very difficult to have friendships with men. And I've never felt very clubby about being gay. I didn't want to be gay. I mean, didn't choose to be gay. I don't want to be gay now as an identity. I can't be bothered. You know, I'm 61. Who cares? Be what you like. No one's interested. You know, I was much more concerned when I was younger. What I mean by all that is that I think being a man is the important thing. And I realised recently, I've always wanted to be just one of the guys. I got 3 brothers. My brothers are very cruel to me, but I always just wanted to be one of the men, really. It's just I also wanted to sleep with some of them. And when I grew up, those 2 things couldn't go together, you know. If you wanted to sleep with somebody, then you couldn't be one of the guys. If you wanted to become the guys, you can't sleep. I wanted both. I still do. So, you know, so I was quite nervous of men, if anything. But as I say, I've never wanted to end up in a kind of gay club. I don't mean literally, I mean in the sense of a sort of gay mafia. I don't value that. I just don't want it to be. I just didn't want it to be an issue. I wanted to just get on with my life, you know. I've enormously benefited from single-sex environments. Enormously, it's allowed me to, you know. I think a lot of gay men I know have problems with their aggression, have problems with feeling insecure and so on. And I had those, and I had problems with their own sense of themselves as a man, and I had that. And living and growing up in a men's environment, as I have for the last 35 years, has hugely changed all that. I feel very, very grateful for those conditions, and have got great friends in my life. I think particularly if you're wanting to get ordained, then single sex is part of our discipline. But there's no real knockdown argument for it, because it's not primarily at that level. Just to be clear, there's no knockdown argument for mixing things either. Because the assumption can be, why show single sex things, explain it, as if mixed things are just nature, and like that's how we all grow up, and why are we making a problem of it? Actually, society is more mixed now than it ever has been in history. You know, the mixing of genders in workplaces, for instance, is very, very recent. One thinker says perhaps it literally just doesn't work when you mix genders in the workplace. They're different things. You know, it's very, very. It's industrial after the Industrial Revolution, really. But before then, men and women tended to work in different realms, you know, and very effectively at best. So actually, our assumptions of everything being mixed is actually very recent historically. So you'd have to then come up with a really good argument for why that's the best thing. And I don't think there's a knockdown argument for that, just as I don't think there's a knockdown argument for single sex. But I don't like that sense that I need to explain myself and others don't. You know, neither of them are natural. They're created and they have pros and cons. You know. Yeah.
So you talked a bit about your childhood. You know, I get the sense in times you've been quite a tortured soul. You've been an easy childhood, typical artist, you know, tortured soul. Yeah. I think probably since I've known you definitely become a lot less so.
Yeah,
and happier. But I suppose my question is kind of what has been the struggle for you, the biggest struggle in the spiritual life, and how have you grown?
That's a good question. I think the 2 biggest struggles in my spiritual life have been fear and self-dislike or something like that. I remember coming back from a retreat and giving you this whole list of my problems, and very sweet to me. And I said, here's all the things I've discovered about my life. I sort of I'd sellotape all these A4 things together, which I put on your wardrobe, or here are all my problems. I remember at the end of it came around and said, well, that's very good that you're aware of that, because when you're older you'll be able to really help people with all that, which is a very good answer. So yeah, I think I've been a very fearful person. Feeling threatened, feeling afraid has been I'm afraid a major part of my anxiety, fear, has been a major part of my life. Right since I can remember, I'm clearing all the stuff in my mother's house and finding all these photographs. And, I've got these three older brothers who were actually very cruel to me. And, they all look happy in these photographs, and I always am crying or on the edge of crying, It's quite sad to see these pictures of me again. So fear has been a big thing, and a sort of complicated relationship to myself, which people talk about in terms of self-hatred, but that doesn't quite capture it really. It's more complicated than that. Because I'm both a natural show-off and sort of feel very troubled about myself. So I've had a very complex relationship to myself, if you see. Both, and that complex relationship to self on one hand has made me driven, sometimes quite unhealthily driven, and ambitious and attention-seeking and egotistical. And sometimes it's also that sort of problematic relationship with self has made me depressed, even very depressed and suicidal. And those two things have, I think, been I've also been very fearful of conflict, which is weird because I'm outspoken but thin-skinned, which is a very bad combination. So how I've grown in that, I don't know. The whole self-dislike thing, I just shelved, I'm afraid, for years. I just thought, I did remember doing the Maitreyabandhu, I just couldn't get anywhere with Maitreyabandhu practice. And quite quickly stopped doing it, like within a year or two, stopped doing any Maitreyabandhu practice. It just made matters worse for me. I definitely thought I needed metta, I definitely thought metta was essential, but I couldn't see where I was going to find any. So it actually problematized it even more. So I just shelved it for years. It's actually only quite recently that I've gone back to it. I just thought, okay, well, it's like I've got a limp, and I'm just going to have to limp. It's a bit of a pain, but there you go. And it's not like that, actually. You can actually change your sense of your relationship to yourself. And tentatively, I think I've made progress on that, but that's quite recent. And in terms of my fear, well, it's a weird old thing, because as you take more responsibility, you keep putting yourself in the firing line more. And so I'm not... Looking back on my life now, so much of my life has been dominated by anxiety, actually. When you look back and think, oh, actually I was just frightened, that's all it was. I got myself into a big set, I was just frightened, that's all it was. And I think there's a long way to go with that. And as I've gone on, you take on more responsibility, therefore more things come your way. And I've had quite a lot of troubles since I was ordained. I've had very good friends, always. And I'm generally not as fearful now. The other thing that struck me just the other day, someone was asking me a similar question, was that they were saying, how have I grown? And one of the things I realised in talking to them about it was that I'm no longer that bothered about that. Whereas when I was young, I was very bothered about that. Sometimes when you practice Buddhism, it's like you plant a plant and you keep on pulling up to see whether it's grown or not. And that's what I was like. I do a meditation. Okay, did it work? Do a puja. Did it work? You keep pulling a plant up, it's going to ruin the plant. So a lot of my early life, I kept on pulling the plant up of my life and trying to find out whether it's growing or not. And I just don't do that now. I'm not interested in whether I've grown or not. There's much more interesting things in life than whether I've grown or not. There's other people, there's everything, there's everything still to be done, all of which is much more interesting than whether I've grown or not. And that is actually, I hadn't realised, but that is quite a change. I used to be very preoccupied with, am I making progress? Am I making enough progress? Am I good enough? Am I not good enough? Oh my God, I seem to have gone back again. I was doing fine a minute ago. I'm just not that interested in all that. That might be just partly age, but there's life, isn't there? Most of life is not you. and there's so much of it, and I'm much more interested in that, and I think the Dharma is the way into life, you know. So I'm not so bothered about that now. But I do, if I was to teleport myself back in time, I'd want someone to help me with my self-esteem more effectively. We didn't know then. I didn't know about depression then. Like I was depressed when I was 13, which is very serious. You know, I was suicidal when I was 13. You know, if you're depressed before the age of 21, you're like 85% likely to be depressed again later on in your life. You know, the statistics ramp up hugely if you were depressed when you're very young. And you know, I'd like to find a way of helping more with that. I need to do more work on it myself, but I do think we've yet to really quite help people with their self-esteem. I think it's a complex and subtle thing, and like for instance, I think self-care doesn't help. I think self-care makes it worse. But I know what you're trying to achieve in self-care. You know, I think we need a much more careful way of helping people with their self-esteem. Because you can actually change it. I didn't think you could, but you can.
Okay, well our time is up for this part, so thanks much, Ben. It's very nice being able to be the one asking you the questions. You'll all have a chance to ask questions in a bit. We're going to go and have a tea break in a minute. First we're just going to have a little 5-minute sit just to let it all sink in. We'll just get back in the meditation process. Just pass you to prepare a minute.